Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so glad you're here today. We have an awesome guest, Scott Maderer. He and his wife, Carrie, started Inspired Stewardship as a business to serve Christian men and couples that are struggling to live out their calling. He's written a great book. It was published in July of 2024. Inspired Living: Assemble the Puzzle of Your Calling by Mastering Your Time, Your Talent, and Your Treasures. He's an expert in helping folks transition from quote unquote working to living their calling, whatever that calling looks like for them, helping people identify their calling, get out of their own way so that they can really live it out, and how they can deal with their time, talent, and treasures to really live the life that they dream. Scott's also certified in DISC, personality communication tools, and has been working as a coach, people coach, since 2011 and doing it full time since 2017. And Scott's specialty, it's one of my favorite things to talk about, is he specializes in mindset and behavior change. Scott, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad you could join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Hope we bring some value to your listener.
I know you will. And where we're going to start at is so many people struggle with identifying, understanding, or clarifying what their actual calling in life is. How do you do that?
So let me start kind of with defining some terms, and then I'll give you some exercises, some practical things that you can actually try. Because I think one of the challenges we have is we talk about, oh, I can't find my calling, I can't find my purpose, I can't find my passion, I can't find my career, I can't find my vocation. We treat all of that big bundle of stuff like it's all one thing. And the truth is it's not, So let's start just with career and vocation, because in most of the world, we kind of use those two words interchangeably, right? It's my vocation, it's my career, it's what I do to get paid. Technically, those words mean completely different things. So career, if you go back and you look at where the word came from, the root word for career is the same root word for cart. A career is a method of transportation. It's something that gets you from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Okay. If you think about it, the reason we now use that as the thing we get paid to do is because what did we do with carts? We took goods to market and then sold them, right? So it was our method of making money, and it still means that today. It's what you get paid to do.
Yeah.
Vocation, on the other hand, the root word there is vocalis. The same root word that we get vocalization, vocal. So it literally means to be called. Okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean the same. Notice career, things I get paid to do, vocation, things I am called to do. Completely different meanings, yet we treat them the same. By the way, by definition, if there is someone, if you're being called, that means there's a caller. So I'm a person of faith like you are. I believe in that it's God, but regardless of what name you give it, it's saying that there's something bigger than just me. There's something bigger than just making money. There's something bigger than just getting paid. And that's my vocation. That is what we mean when we say calling. So if you think about it, what that means is your calling is bigger than what you happen to get paid to do. It's not the same as. Your calling should show up in how you and I talk today. Your calling should show up in how you're a husband for your spouse. Your calling should show up in how you're a father to your children. Your calling should show up in how you're a volunteer. Calling should show up in how you walk down the driveway in the morning and get the mail. It's your calling should penetrate all components of your life. Yeah. And that's what makes it so hard. Because what we want to do is say, am I doing the work and getting paid to do the thing that brings me purpose? And what you're actually doing is you're shrinking your calling and making it too small, because your calling runs throughout. So I promised you a couple of practical exercises. So I'm going to give you two, and everybody that's listening, this is stuff you could do right away. You can put it into practice right now.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with finding purpose, passion, calling, whatever name you want to give it, all means the same thing. The first exercise you want to do is a looking backwards exercise. Real simple. Take a sheet of paper or a couple of sheets of paper, divide it into 3 columns. Down the left-hand column, start brainstorming everything that you've ever done in your life. For some of us that have a little gray hair, that might be a long list. Okay. And by the way, I don't mean everything you've gotten paid to do in your life. I literally mean everything you've done in your life. Be as broad as you can. Talk about that time you were, a counselor at summer camp when you were 13 years old, whatever. Okay. Yeah. Your first date. I don't care. It could be any type of experience that you can recall and remember. Down the middle column, as you write down those activities, put something about that activity that brought you joy, something that you love, something that fed your soul, something that gave you energy, something that when you look back on it, you're like, man, it makes you smile, right? It's the part of it that just it connected to you. And then in the last column about each activity, write something about that activity that didn't bring you joy, that didn't give you energy, that didn't feed your soul, the things that you frown about, so to speak, when you recall those activities. And by the way, you are not allowed to leave either of those columns blank. So I don't care how bad the memory is or how good the memory is, you got to find something about every activity that brought you joy and something about every activity that didn't feed your soul. Because the truth is there's nothing that's perfect, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the only perfection is perfection that we're not going to reach on this earth. So, we haven't had it yet. Yeah. So that's not, there's always the laundry that has to get done is the way I like to put it. There's always that one load of laundry that nobody wants to do. Usually it's the one with socks and underwear and all of that stuff in it, because then you have to fold it. And there's always something about an activity that you don't love. And honestly, if you're fair, there's also something about that activity that you do love. Even going back to that laundry activity, guess what? When you're done, you've got fresh, clean clothes, So I don't care what it is. Find something that you loved and something that you didn't love about all of it. And then after you've done this, and by the way, this is a great activity to do over several days and just kind of pick at and come back to, and not just try to sit down and crank it out in one setting. When you look at that, start highlighting things that keep showing up. You might use different words, you might have different language, but there's going to be patterns. There's going to be stuff that consistently shows up in the joy column. There's going to be stuff that consistently shows up in the not joy column, And what that does is it begins to give you an inkling of how you're made, how you're designed, the wiring in your brain and your body and your heart and your soul that, God has put in you that makes you go, this is the stuff that I love. And by the way, don't be surprised if when you start looking at it, you start thinking to yourself, but this is stuff that everyone can do. This is stuff, surely everyone finds joy in this. They don't, but you'll believe that they do, because a lot of times it's the stuff that comes easy to you, that's so natural to you. It's like breathing, that you feel like, oh, everyone could do this. And yet everyone can't. So that's looking backwards. The truth is, though, for most of us, we're not that at the end of our journey yet either. We've still got paths ahead of us. So I don't want to just look backwards. I also want to project forward into the future. So here's the activity for that. This one's a little bit of a mental activity, but you're going to do some writing. So again, have a blank sheet of paper in front of you. And imagine for a minute that it's 5 years in the future. 5 years from today, you happen to be on a trip and you're flying back home. I said this in an airport because I used to be in the corporate world. I was always in an airport. So this resonates with me. We were talking about traveling before we got started today. Usually most people have had the experience of flying home from a trip. So imagine you're flying home, and you know how you have that connecting flight sometimes where you have to land at an airport, you have to go to another gate, and then you get on a different plane and you fly the rest of the way home. Imagine for a minute, you get off the plane, you're trotting across the airport, you're going to find the gate, because we have to somehow go and find the gate and make sure it exists before we can go get coffee or anything, right? So we go find the gate, And as you walk up to the gate, you look up, and there above the gate is those dreaded words, flight delayed. Oh, man. So you wait in line for a minute. You get up to the flight attendant that's there, and you say, how long is the flight delayed? She says, about 4 hours. You're like, great. Now I'm stuck in an airport in the middle of nowhere. I've only got my little bag that I carried on. I don't have really much with me. So you do what anyone does when they're stuck in an airport for 3 or 4 hours. You go find either a restaurant or a bar, depending on your particular poison, to go hang out in. So I'm going to set it in a restaurant. Imagine you're walking into the restaurant. And as you walk in, from across the restaurant, you hear a voice. Hey, Pat, how you doing? You look over and you realize it's a friend of yours that you kind of lost touch with. Over the last 5 years, they moved, you got busy, they got busy. You've talked to them occasionally, but not really. Y'all kind of drifted apart, but it was one of your really good friends and you haven't seen them for quite a while. So imagine they walk over, they're like, how are you doing? How long are you here? And you're like, well, I wasn't going to be here long at all, but I'm stuck here 4 hours now. Yeah. They're like, well, I'm here for a few hours. Let's go grab a table and catch up. So you sit down at the table. Remember, it's 5 years in the future. And as you and your friend sit down and you get your food, you get your drink, your friend looks at you and goes, man, Pat, how have you been? How have these last 5 years been for you? And you look at your friend and you go, you know what? Now that I think about it, these 5 years have been the best 5 years of my life because. That's your job. Write what comes after the word because. What would be true about your spiritual walk? What would be true about your relationships? What would be true about your finances? What would be true about your career? What would be true about your health? What would be true about all the different components of your life that would make you sincerely tell this friend of yours, you're not lying, you're telling them the truth. Yeah. This has been the best 5 years of my life. Paint that picture and be detailed. Really talk about it. What would be true about all of those different areas of your life? And paint it as detailed and as real as you can. For some of us, this is one of those exercises that it's better to talk than it is to write. Go for a walk and just talk into your phone. Yeah. Maybe put the Bluetooth on so you don't look like a crazy person, but that kind of thing. And go and just talk about it and paint that picture for yourself. Because here's the interesting thing. Between those two activities, most people start to get an inkling of what they're designed to do, what God has called them to do. Because some of it shows up in the past and some of it shows up in the dream of the future. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that suddenly that 5-year future plan will show up exactly the way you pictured it. That's not what I'm saying. This isn't magic, but it does give you a direction that begins to let you start asking, what decisions would I have to make? What would I have to do differently in my life to be going that direction instead of the direction that I'm currently going?
Wow. As you're sharing all that, literally, this is what came to mind. This is what I was immediately picturing. First off, you started off, with purpose, calling, and vocation. And I'm reminded of Jeremiah. Mm-hmm. That before every one of us was even created in our mother's wombs, that God knew us, and I know that word, the translation of that word is that He loved us, and before we were then physically born, He consecrated us, which means that purpose of calling, and mm-hmm. and we have to that's part of our journey, is discovering that. And then, as you were talking about the difference between vocation and career, I thought of, yeah, man, remember vocational education? In high school,
which was trades, right? They would teach
trades. Trades, and then eventually they started calling them career academies. And then here's what I thought. Okay, well, Paul, or Peter, James and John, they were fishermen. That mm-hmm. was their career. And they were really good at it. They were in Capernaum, Sea of Galilee. The best fishing in all of Israel was right there. And and that was their career, but their calling was to be fishers of men. And so that I can picture the difference between the career and your vocation, your purpose, your calling. And then when you're talking, you started going, look backwards, and then, what was the joy, and look forwards. And you said, whatever, you're 13 years old and you're a counselor or whatever. And I thought, man, my first job when I was paid was 15 years old. I worked at McDonald's. So looking back at the past, and what was joyful about that? Payday.
Yeah. And that may have been it. That may have been the only moment of joy you had.
And what wasn't joyful about it is I was the fry guy, French fry guy, getting burned by hot oil. There was no joy in that. So,
but I bet if you reflect on it, there were other things about that job that brought you joy.
Yeah, I got to meet
Beyond
people, just all sorts of things. But you don't think about it because we get used to routines and habits, and we miss a lot of opportunities.
Yep.
And then you're going looking forward. And again, I'm picturing the apostles. They're looking backwards, and they go, "Man, I had a great job, great career. Man, we were catching fish. Why do you think we were always mending our nets? Because we were catching a lot of fish. Things were getting damaged." And then I get this calling, "Come follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." And then if they sat down and did what you said, looking forward 5 years, what does your life, write it down in detail. And so I can visualize and picture the reality of what you're saying is it will give you focus. And there's a recent saint, he was canonized last year, 15 years old, born in 1991, died in 2006 of an advanced form of leukemia, Milan, Italy. His name's Carlo Acutis. And I think a modern day message is to what I just shared from Jeremiah and forward is this is what he said: "We're all born unique, but sadly, many of us die as photocopies of someone or something else."
Yep.
And that's what people are searching for, that uniqueness, and how can I make a difference, in my life and in the lives of other people. Yeah. And I know one of the tools that you use, it's not the only tool, but it's one of the tools that you use is the DISC tool. Can you explain what is DISC, and how do you utilize that to help people discover these things about themselves, their talents and their gifts, and how to spend their time and money?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of different personality and communication kind of assessment tools out there, right? There's, Gallup's has Strength Finder, there's Enneagram, there's Myers-Briggs, there's, all of these different things. And DISC is one of them. Now, the reason I like DISC is a couple of things. One of them is it's simple enough that I can carry it around in my head. And so I don't need a lot of fancy schmancy stuff. Yes, there's an assessment. Yes, that's more accurate than just my gut instinct, but I can remember it and apply it at some level, just having a conversation with you, and do it in kind of real time. And so that's one of the reasons I lean on DISC is, quite frankly, I'm not good enough or smart enough to carry most of the other words of them around in my head. They're too complex. But I think all of these different kinds of assessments that we take are kind of the same idea, in that we are a full and complex human being. And these are they're like little peek holes, little slits that let us see into kind of our personality or our style or how we're wired. But they never none of them give us the full, complete 100% picture, right? Only God can see that. What we get is glimpses and pieces. That doesn't, however, mean that it's not useful, because just kind of like the activities that we were doing, as you start to uncover these pieces, it gives you building blocks that you can kind of build from. And so that's how I use DISC. So real quickly, again, DISC is simple enough that I can explain it on this podcast and you could actually start using it tomorrow at some level. So Marsden back in the 60s came up with the idea of, instead of studying abnormal psychology, he wanted to go study normal psychology. He wanted to go talk to normal people for a while. And you kind of have to picture the psychologist being like, I'm tired of talking. And I know I just want to go talk to some normal people. Yeah. So he goes and talks to some normal people for a while. And he comes up with a model for how people are able to, their personality and their communication style. It divides it into 4 quadrants based on 2 characteristics. So imagine, if you're not watching, imagine your XY coordinate plane from geometry. You've got your Y-axis that goes up and down, your X-axis that goes left to right. And at the top, you have the word outgoing. And at the bottom of the Y-axis, you have the word reserved. So some people are more outgoing and some people are more reserved. Would you agree that that's accurate?
Yeah, it's kind of like extrovert, introvert.
So it is different than extrovert and introvert, but it's similar. Yeah. So just to be clear too, let me define it, because that is, a lot of people do actually hear the words extrovert and introvert when I say outgoing and reserved. Actually, outgoing and reserved here has more to do with how your internal motor runs. So what I mean by that is, an outgoing person, imagine that person that they get up in the morning and their feet hit the ground and they're just go, 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 go. They talk fast. They make decisions fast. They're moving fast. Everything is fast. A lot of times those people are extroverts, but you can also, believe it or not, have a reserved extrovert or a outgoing introvert. Okay. So I'm an example. I'm actually pretty high on the outgoing scale, but I'm actually, when you test me for extrovert, introvert, I test pretty high on the introversion scale. Okay. So I'm mixed. The reserved is somebody whose engine runs a little slower. They're a little calmer. They make decisions. They take their time. They think it through.
Yeah.
They often just have a slower pace about what they do. That's reserved. And again, sometimes you can have a reserved extrovert. Sometimes you can have a reserved introvert. So it's not 100% correlation. But still, with that definition, I think we'd all agree, man, there's some people that are outgoing as, crazy. Some people are reserved. And then some people are kind of in the middle. They're a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. Mm. The other characteristic, the X characteristic, is on one side, you have task-oriented. And on the other side, you have people-oriented. Again, to define, a task-oriented person is somebody that when you give them something to do, or when they have a job to do or an activity that they want to do, they think about the how and the what before they think about the who. How are we going to get this done? What are the results? What are we trying to achieve? The how and the what. And then they'll think about the who. It's not that they don't think about people, but it's just not their first thought. Right. People-oriented people, it's the opposite. You give them that activity, that task, that work to do. They think first about the who, and then we'll think about the how and the what.
Yeah.
Okay. Their first thought is this activity going to hurt anyone? How can we take care of people? How can we have fun? Who am I going to get to do this with? That's kind of their first thought, their first wiring. And then eventually they'll get to the how and the what. So again, none of these are good or bad, by the way. Right. They're just different. Okay. They all have its strengths. They all have disadvantages, period. They all have times when they work well. They all have times when they struggle. So it's not a good or bad thing. But if you think about that quadrant plane, you now end up with 4 squares or 4 quadrants, right? In one quadrant, you have people that are outgoing, task-oriented people. He called those people D's for dominant. Okay. These are the direct dominant people. These are your classic type A folks, right? They want results. They're the lead follower, get out of my way because I'm going to run you over people. Okay. Yeah. Those, by the way, that's about 10% of the population is wired really high D. Okay. But these folks They're high drivers. They get things done, but out of control, they tend to run over people. They tend to kind of drive people away. They can have high conflict. In control, they can be wonderful people. Okay. They really get things done. So that's the D. Going to the next, you have outgoing, but people. He called these people I for inspired or inspirational kind of people. These folks are the life of the party. These folks are motivated by fun. So if D's are motivated by results, these folks are motivated by fun. They like to enjoy life. Think about it. You've been at a conference or something, and somebody up on stage goes, I need a volun. And before they even get the word volunteer completely out of their mouth, there's a few people that either have their hand up or are moving towards the stage already. You know, I've actually been to one where I saw somebody that was so strong of an I, they went, I need a V, and there's somebody on stage. Like they, you know, I ain't giving anybody else a chance. I'm up here. Okay. Because they like to be the center of attention. They want to, that's energizing to them. Okay. That's an I. Coming down. Now you've got folks that are people oriented and reserved. Notice I'm going to talk a little softer because I'm talking to those folks. And these people, when I talk like I normally do, these people hear that as conflict. They feel like I'm mad at them. These are the S's. These are the supporters. By the way, I forgot, in the I category, that's about 20 to 25% of the population, give or take. I'm going to warn you up front, these percentages that I'm going to give you are ranges, so they're not going to add up to exactly 100% because it varies in different populations, but it'll give you a rough estimate.
Yeah.
S's, on the other hand, man, they're about 40% of the population. This is the most common personality type. These are the nicest people on the planet. Unfortunately, S also sometimes stands for sucker because they can get taken advantage of. These people care about fairness. They care about justice. They want people to be taken care of. It hurts them when people hurt.
Yeah.
You get a bunch of S's together in a room, and they'll immediately start holding hands and rocking back and forth and singing Kumbaya. I mean, it's amazing. You know, they just bond immediately. My wife is a high S, by the way. And, you know, again, nicest person on the planet. I also have to remind her, hun, you're being taken advantage of. You know, stop. The last group then is going to be task-oriented and reserved. These folks are the C's for cautious. And the C's are going to be motivated by getting things right. They want every I dotted, every T crossed. If there is a process, they are going to follow it. They're great at taking it, you know, a process and applying it and doing things right. They also take a little while to make decisions. They tend to be a little slower to process because they want to think through all of the ramifications of everything before they take any action. Okay. They're going to be about 20-25% of the population as well. So notice, by the way, if you had to guess when you start talking to someone, you want to start talking to them like they're an S. You know? And now, again, it is different in different populations. So if you're in a group full of police officers, there'll still be a mix, but the mix won't be exactly the same as what I just said. Okay. It'll be slightly different. If you're in a room full of entrepreneurs, it'll be slightly different. If you're in a room full of nurses, it'll be different. You know, so it's not identical. And no, by the way, there's not one of these is perfect for a particular career. Okay. You know, again, SWAT guy, I probably want some of the SWAT guys to be the ones that make a really, really quick decision.
Yeah.
But I probably also want some that are like, hold on, time out. You know, let's think this through. We're about to screw up, you know, and put the brakes on occasionally. So it's not like there's one thing that's perfect. And the last piece of information is most of us aren't really only one of these. We're a blend of all of them, but at different levels. So, for instance, I am very high in the D and the C. Okay. Doesn't mean I can't have any I and S. I do have I and S, but my natural tendency is to go to that kind of direct, you know, I'm very task-oriented by nature. I have to learn and work to think about the people. Not that I can't do it,
Yeah.
but it's not my natural first inclination. My wife, on the other hand, is an IS. So she thinks first about people, partly, by the way, that what makes us good partners, because, she can kind of kick me on the shins and remind me, dude, you're scaring them, that kind of thing, and bring me back down.
Wow. Yeah. And I can see the application of this process, not just physically giving somebody a test and asking 150 questions, and then whatever formula you use to categorize them, but in a very simple way, that, I mean, just as a listener right now, I would say to kind of start that conversation with somebody, of it be as simple as going, "Hey, Scott, what's your dream job?"
Mhm.
And you share with me what that looks like, and I can see into, you're a people person, or or
You're not.
you're not. And and how many of us were raised with this mantra: if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Mhm.
And that, a friend of mine wrote a book, Boss versus Leader, and I can see where the boss would be fitting in this diagram versus the leader, who's a connector, wants to learn more about you and those kinds of things. But then to find out how, like, what's your dream job? And you tell me, well, I want to be a brain surgeon. Okay, now are you a daydreamer, or if you're serious, I could use this concept of identifying, basically it's a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities,
Mhm.
threats, and go, well, what is preventing you from achieving that dream job? And that's going to give me insight to your maturity, that you've really thought about this, that you're forward thinking, like you said, that looking ahead 5 years. And
What's really cool is literally just by having a conversation with people and listening to the
yeah,
words they use and the way they talk, you start to get an inclination.
yeah,
You know, do they take time, when they're processing things? Okay, they're probably more reserved than outgoing. I'm pushing them down to the bottom part of the quadrant. You know, when they say things, when they talk about things, do they first talk about, making sure other people are taken care of, or fairness or justice? Do they use language like that? Or do they use language like getting it right, making it, I want to make sure it's done right.
yeah,
You'll literally hear people say that. What they're doing is they're identifying their characteristics.
yeah,
I can walk into someone's house or office, and if they're the one that, decorated it or keeps up with it, I can tell things about them. Are there pictures of the family on the desk?
yeah.
Where are the pictures of the
Pictures.
family on the desk? Are they behind the person where you see them when you walk into the room? Or are they in front of the person where they see them while they're working? You see
Yeah,
how that's different in terms of how they're thinking about the situation? So you literally can start to identify how they're wired. And then what that lets you do is it lets you start to change how you talk. Because imagine for a minute, by the way, if you're mature enough to understand how the other person is wired, you are the one that has to change how you communicate, not them.
yeah,
Okay, because you understand it, they don't. So the
yeah,
minute you learn this, because imagine for a minute a D, right, who's very outgoing, task-oriented person, talking to a really high S, who's going to be a reserved and people-oriented person. And the task, the D is talking normally for them. They're talking like they would talk to another D. Yeah, Pat, look, all you got to do is just take care of this, get it done, and make sure it's all taken care of by tomorrow. They walk out of the room. The S is going, what did I do? I screwed up.
yeah,
I'm in trouble. I
yeah,
must have let him down. I must have hurt him.
yeah,
And you could not mean that at all. Okay. It's like basically the task oriented people speak German, and the people-oriented people speak French.
Yeah.
And so what do we do sometimes when we're talking to someone in a foreign language? You're like, well, they don't understand me, so I'll talk louder. It's like they're not deaf. They just don't understand your language.
Yeah.
So it's not scream. It's not talk louder. It's not, drive them further. It's realize that the problem is you're talking the wrong language.
Yeah.
If you just take the time. And so I'll give you a real world example. I was in corporate for 11 years, had a team of about 180 people that reported up through me, worked with them, loved it. I consider myself a very good leader. And what was interesting is I went through and I identified who in my team was the S's. Okay. Who were the people that needed that people moment, right? They needed that touch. And I literally on Wednesday, each week, I had a little event on my calendar that popped up and it had 3 names. And the next Wednesday, it was 3 different names. And the next Wednesday, it was 3 different names. And they just repeated. Okay. So every Wednesday at a certain time of the day, I got up and I went and visited those 3 people, the 3 names that popped up. And I'd walk up and I'd be like, hey, Pat. And I had a notebook and I had notes in it.
Yeah.
And I would turn to Pat's page and I'd be like, hey, Pat, how you doing? I remember, Thomas had a baseball game last week. You told me about his baseball game a couple of weeks ago when we talked. How'd that turn out? Oh man, they're in the championship. Oh, that's awesome. That's great. And I'm making notes. And they knew I was making notes. I'm doing it right in front of them, and they knew that there was a pop-up with their name on it. Okay. They knew when their Wednesday was. They looked forward to it. They'd be sitting there going,
yeah.
Because all of a sudden, why? I'm going, I care. I mean, the message I'm sending is, I don't need this. Okay. I could care less. Seriously. I mean, I didn't need to know whether their kid won the championship of the baseball game. It doesn't motivate me, but it connected with them.
Yeah.
And it's important to me to serve them.
Yeah.
Okay. And so guess what? These people would have charged the gates of hell with water pistols, right? By the way, you'll notice I said I visited the S's, but I didn't say anything about the I's, but the I's are people oriented too. I didn't need to go visit them. I taught them that, hey, if my door is open, you're allowed to come in and interrupt me. If my door is closed, you need to give me some time because I'm working on something that I can't be interrupted. Okay. And just come back later and the door will be open. And I was great about, man, my door's open. Those I's would come in my office. They'd sit down for 20 minutes. They'd talk to me for 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it was. They'd bye, off they'd go, right? And they were wired for the day. They were happy, okay? Because they'd gotten that moment of interaction. Or I'd see them in the break room just naturally. I didn't have to seek them out because because remember, they're outgoing. It's the S's that were reserved. The S's weren't going to come to me. I had to go to them. The I's would come to me, so I didn't have to go to them. My D's, right? Give them, Pat, this is what you need to get done. Go get it done. Let me know if you need any help. Yeah. That's it. That was the extent of my communication. The C's. Okay, here's the process. Here's the process doc. Here's what we're looking for. Here's a couple of places where I've noticed that people have run into problems. Let me know if there's anything that you'd recommend there in terms of tweaking it or making it clearer because we've had some problems here. So if you see a way to fix it, let me know. Yeah. Dude, they'd go off and they'd rewrite the process and it would be awesome. It's like all the holes were filled because that's what they're good at. And so it's recognizing people's giftings and skills, communicating with them in the way that they needed to be communicated with, and they perform better. Shocking.
Now, how can we flip this that and our conversations kind of, from the top down of being responsible for people and processes and production, results. How can that worker be that S person who is the subordinate? How can they apply these same analysis of how to deal with leadership? Or even worse is, what if they weren't a Scott Maderer, they were a Napoleon, and it's a toxic environment. Mm-hmm. How can how can the workforce apply these principles and insights to dealing with a toxic boss? And when I say toxic, I'm not talking.
No,
I mean,
I know what you mean.
if it goes into, hey, this is a hostile work environment, that's when
You're not talking about abuse, but you're just talking about somebody that's not really aware of how to manage people.
Yeah,
they're a boss. They're not a leader.
Yeah, well, I call them the south end of a northbound horse. So how can employees, or not just employees, even in your relationships, your next door neighbor is the south end of a northbound horse?
Here's what's really cool.
How can we apply that?
And here's what's really cool. All that you have to be is the person that understands this. You don't have to be in a leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
I use the example of being a leadership position, but I actually started doing this when I wasn't in a leadership position. It's one of the reasons I got promoted to a leadership position. Okay. Because I could do exactly what you were talking about. I recognize, as an example, that my boss, who was, by the way, an extremely high D and was very much a boss, right? He kind of tended to, he kind of came out of his office, told people what to do, went back in his office. That's what he did. Great guy, by the way, loved him, but just didn't believe in any of that quote touchy-feely stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Like he literally said that one time, this touchy-feely stuff. We don't need to do this touchy-feely stuff at work. It's like, well, depending on what you mean by that, maybe yes, maybe no. But if you mean emotional intelligence, yeah, we do. It's just part of dealing with people. But that was kind of his style. Now, here's what's interesting. His boss, was a really high C. She was somebody who needed all of the details, right? And wanted to know all of the process. When I sent emails, he was on the email and so was she. So I've got to figure out a way to send one email that satisfies somebody that really just wants the bottom line and satisfies somebody that wants all the details. So I literally started writing emails that said, here's what's going on. Here's the executive summary. See below for more detail. And I literally would write. So the first 4, 5, 6 lines of the email would contain all the information that my boss wanted. He didn't care about all the details. Okay. He trusted me. He knew I had it handled. If there was something in that little summary that he needed to follow up with, he'd come follow up. But below that, I would write sometimes 4, 5, 6, 8 pages, of all of the extra information that I knew his boss needed. So guess what? They both looked at me and went, this guy's a great employee. Okay. Because I gave them what they needed in a way that they could process and use and serve them. Okay. So even there, notice what was it? I understood what they needed because I understood their styles and the way they communicated and the way they processed information. And then I came up with a way of giving them what they needed. Okay. Same thing for your coworker, that or that neighbor or whatever. If you start understanding how they're wired, a lot of times you can diffuse some of that negativity by meeting them where they're at, and it starts to help. Now, again, like you said earlier, there are some people that are they're a jerk, has nothing to do with their personality type. They're just a jerk. That's different. Cut those people out of your life. But the ones that are just not understanding and not communicating well, you meet them where they're at, and it helps.
Great advice. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Is on the one hand, the devil on the one side is going, hey, I'm not your babysitter. I have a lot of stuff to do in my job and whatnot. And then the other devil on the other side is going, you don't need this crap. You're getting burned out. You ought to quit. You ought to go somewhere else. And you get, I don't know what the research I think is out there that I read about a month ago. We have 50,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative. So how do we train ourselves, if you will, or and I don't mean touchy-feely, I need my quiet space type deal, is how do we realistically keep a balance between being compassionate and empathetic enough to understand how to communicate with people up and down the chain, but at the same time that we are committed to not doing somebody else's job for them. Because on the one hand, when I hear you say, the high C, I immediately go, oh, micromanager. They're a helicopter. They're going to be hovering around me, judging everything I do. And then we put up the defenses. We retire on duty. We avoid that person. All those kinds of negative things. What's the framework, if you will, to be balanced in doing the things you're saying, but at the same time you're not coddling or you're holding other people accountable to, hey, this is your job, and I'm not going to do it for you.
So that's what's interesting. As you become aware of how people are wired, I would actually say that gets easier, not harder.
Okay. And how?
For a few reasons. Okay. One is, again, I can start thinking about who I've got, if I'm the boss, who I've got working for me, or if I'm an employer or employee, what are the strengths and weaknesses of all of the people around me, including my boss, by the way. Okay. And I start using that to my advantage. In other words, if my boss is that detailed person, I'm gonna harness that. Dude, why don't you write the process, that you want me to follow? And then I'm going to follow it, because guess what? He's going to do that. Okay. If he's the micromanager before he gives me the job. Okay, Pat, I know you like to get updates on how things are going. How often would you like me to update you on where I'm at in this process? Okay. If I have any questions about the details, of how something needs to be produced or everything, can we set up a regular time that I can meet with you and make sure I've got those details right in the way that you want them? Because I know that you want them done right. So I'm now, again, notice I'm talking to him in his language. He's literally hearing, he wants to get it done right.
Yeah.
That's how I'm wired. Man, yeah. I like this guy. Okay. Doesn't matter if I'm wired that way or not. I'm talking to him. And again, this could be a coworker. This could be my spouse. This could be my boss. It doesn't matter, but I'm meeting them where they're at. Now, does that mean I have to forgive people for everything that they do, or I have to do it all for? No, it doesn't. It just means I need to speak their language so that they know I understand them. Okay. I still, again, when I had to fire people, and sometimes I have to fire people for not doing their job right. So there's a difference between holding people accountable and just being a jerk. If I know that you're wired a certain way and I don't communicate with you that way, I'm setting you up for failure.
Or you're setting yourself up for failure as the boss.
If I'm the boss, I'm setting the team up for failure, which guess what? Makes me look bad.
Yeah.
Again, I took a team that was looked at by the company as one of the lowest performing teams. And within about a year, they were one of the highest performing teams.
Wow.
Why? And I didn't change a bunch of the people. It's not like I got rid of everybody, but because all of a sudden I started going, hey, how do people need to hear stuff? How do people need to understand stuff? What are people's strengths and weaknesses? How can I redesign the workflow so that the right people are doing the right stuff at the right time? It's just thinking about it. And again, I started all of this whenever I was just the employee. And I would argue that it's one of the reasons I got promoted very quickly into leadership, is because they noticed, Scott's actually organizing the team, on this project, and he's stepping in and going, hey, Pat, I know you're really good at this. Would you mind taking on this part of the work? Because that's something that I think, based on how you've talked and how you've done things in the past, man, I think you're going to really be awesome at this. Would you mind doing that? And Pat's over here going, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Scott gave me the very thing that, man, I was looking forward to doing that. I was hoping I'd get that job, and you can kind of motivate people. Even though I wasn't formally in a leadership position, I was taking on leadership because I was able to think through. And again, it's not magic. It's literally taking the time and the effort to learn what people need, how they communicate, and where they're coming from. All of that being said, by the way, was I perfect at it? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Were there days that I got mad or I flew off the handle or something went wrong and it's like, oh my, of course there is,
Yeah.
but when I can step back and take that breath and go, wait a minute, let's look at this situation a little differently. I used to tell people, if you really believe that person showed up to work on Monday morning going, boy, I really hope I suck at my job this week, you need to fire them. Okay. If that's true, they don't need to be there. But if it's that they showed up on Monday going, boy, I hope this is a good week, and then things went wrong, now we need to figure out what went wrong. That's a different modality. Okay. Because it is, and again, there are some people that just show up on Monday and are like, I don't really care if this job goes well or not. Okay, that's fine. That's different. There are people that are just toxic people. Those people, you set boundaries, you hold them accountable, and you move them on. But the folks that are it's just they don't understand what they're being asked to do and how they're being asked to do it, or you're asking them to do something that's so far out of their strength set that all you've done is set them up for failure, and better. That's on you.
Yeah. And you just kind of summarized. I just read a really good book by Chris Voss, and he was the designated international hostage negotiator for the Department of Justice. And he wrote a great book, the one I just finished. It's called Never Split the Difference. And he talks about a lot of those things of, as a hostage negotiator, if you try to talk down to or not in the language of the hostage taker, even if they're just holding themselves hostage, is the recognizing that every human being, regardless of nationality or anything, fundamental core thing, they all want and need is safety, security, prosperity, and control. And you have to figure out what is threatening one or more of those four needs or wants. And that's what you're saying, is learning to talk the language of the person and being because a hostage negotiator is probably one of the quietest people you'll ever meet, because they're good listeners, not good talkers. And they know, and what's John Maxwell say, if you want great answers, ask great questions, kind of stuff. So I'm seeing how you pull from a lot of these areas into your career, your calling and vocation as a coach and as a speaker and a writer. So man, just awesome stuff. I've taken so many notes here. And one of the things you really triggered for me is this was advice that I got, 30 years ago, probably, when I was a young sergeant on the police department, was my lieutenant telling me in my annual evaluation, he goes, Pat, one of your greatest strengths is leading by example. And one of the areas that you have to spend more time working on is leading by example. And I looked at him and we were friends. We'd been in a Bible study together before I was even a cop. And I looked at him, I go, Bruce, I have no idea what you just said to me. and then he goes, well, let me put it this way. There's a fine line between leading by example and doing somebody else's job for them.
Right.
And that's the danger, that's the line you're crossing, is you're not letting people, you're not delegating, for one thing, and you're not letting people fail, and not in a life-threatening situation, but
right.
Assign people responsibilities for their beat, and then don't go out there and do it for them, because they have to learn. He actually said, you've taught them that they don't have to do anything, because Pat's going to do, the sergeant's going to do it. He'll take care of it. So I hear a lot of those things that you're sharing.
Just curious, what was your motivation for, quote, doing it for them? Why did you want to do it for them?
Oh, at the time, I hid behind. Well, actually, I wasn't conscious of this at the time. In reality, I was doing it for two reasons. One, I used the excuse of I'm a high drive person. I'm that go-getter. I can't sit behind a desk. I can't wait for you to call me. I want to be in the thick of everything. That was the excuse. The reality was, if you didn't do your job, I felt like I was a failure, and then my lieutenant is going to ride my butt because I have a bunch of goofballs that aren't doing their job.
And so was it a failure because the job wasn't done right, or was it a failure because the results that y'all were getting weren't as good as they could be? What was the
Early
underlying?
on, I would have said it was a failure because I had slugs working for me.
Okay.
And I became a sergeant in 1994. But then I read a book in 1999. It came out. Within weeks of it coming out, somebody goes, Pat, you need to read this book. And it was called Danger, Duty, and Disillusion, A Worldview of the LAPD by Joan Barker. And so in that 5-year gap after I read that book, what I came to realize is the progression, and it's circular, not linear, the progression of law enforcement merit. And then I actually applied it to marriages and to raising children and all sorts of other things, is the change in behavior in the officers across the board, across the United States, is they join law enforcement because they want to help and give back to their community. They what's the word for it? Greater than themselves, and they find their niche, what they're good at, their competency, what they like, but then going through all those stages of that first 3 to 5 years, there's all these stressors that are building up that are causing this disillusion. This isn't what I signed up for. I got a jerk for a boss. It's kind of like marriages, the 7-year thing. And then they have to, the resolution, they're disillusioned. So now they have to resolve that stress and that burden, and they'll retire on duty. They'll literally quit or lateral to another agency. They'll the ultimate worst resolution, suicide amongst active duty law enforcement. More officers commit suicide than are actually killed in the line of duty. Or they can redefine their idealism of why they became a cop in the first place. So when I grasped that from a supervisor standpoint, but as a sergeant, later as a lieutenant, later as a superintendent, is I could identify and get clarity on, hey, what stage is this person in? Are they in idealism? Are they in their competency they really like? Or are they disillusioned? And how can I help them resolve that in a healthy, positive way? And I didn't know, the safety, security, competent or prosperity and control. Right. I didn't know those concepts by name, but intuitively I was figuring that out over the years. But here was the key to all that. None of that took place. I read the book, and in reading the book, I go, holy crap, that's me. I was in my own disillusion,
right,
category. So I needed to take care of those issues internally, for myself, and by asking for mentorship, by asking for coaching, by doing more studying and research and self-reflection. expect other people to do the same thing unless I did it first. And
Right.
and what's the classic Maxwell? Nobody cares what you think or say until they know you first care about them.
Right.
And so that was an awakening, and this is over a period of years.
Sure.
Uh,
Absolutely.
I didn't get introduced to Maxwell until 2013. So it's been a journey, and learning specific action steps that become habits. I think for me has been so important.
Yeah.
So what are take that in mind. Like I start my day off before I start scrolling, emails and news and all that. I have an app on my phone where I read about a couple saints of the day
Mhm.
within the Catholic Church. I read a New Testament from Mass for that day. What was the epistle that was read, and what was the gospel that was read? And I spend some time reflecting on that, and that sets the tone for my day. And that's a habit that's taken years to develop.
Mhm.
What are some of the fundamental habits you recommend to people that will get them onto this road of living life more abundantly, understanding their calling, their vocation, their talents, their treasures, their time?
You actually really just identified probably the single most important one, which is having time to reflect, to having white space or quiet time. People call it different things, and creating that, scheduling that, and making that a habit, protecting that. What happens all too often is folks start that process of, I'm going to have some quiet time in the morning or quiet time in the evening. By the way, it doesn't have to be in the morning, but whatever it is, but then
Yeah.
they let it drift. They stop protecting it. And it pretty soon, other things encroach on it.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna check email real quick, or I'm just gonna whatever, right?
Mhm.
I'm just gonna watch Netflix for a few minutes, 3 hours later, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, because you have to create that time to be introspective and be quiet. Like I use a lot of that time as spiritual time, meditation. For those folks that do meditation, could be a way of doing it. But again, regardless of how you look at the world, having those white space times where you can sit back and reflect and revise and be introspective is probably the single most important habit for self growth. I call it investing in yourself. And then because what happens is, as you do that, what will naturally happen is you'll be able to refill your cup and have the energy to then invest in others.
Yeah.
When you invest in others, you develop influence, and when you develop influence, that makes an impact. So it's those four things come together, but they start with that quiet time. And the immediate pushback people have is, oh, it's selfish to spend time on yourself. It's like, no. This is not being selfish if the reason you're doing it is to refill your cup so that you can serve others well. You know what I mean? So it's one thing if your focus is on me, and you never move past that to the invest in
Yeah.
others stage. Okay, that is selfish. But what I'm talking about is having those spaces, those times to do things like the exercise that I talked at the very beginning of this show. Think about it. That takes time. That
Yeah.
takes thought. That takes energy. But doing it can be fruitful. Learning about disc, reading a book that impacts you. All of these are things that happen in that invest in yourself, that quiet time, that introspective time, when you can begin to identify,
Mhm.
wow, I need to grow in this area, or wow, this is a strength for me, or whatever it is. And so creating that regular rhythm of doing that daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, all of those kinds of, think of them like Russian nesting dolls, right? One feeds
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
it is really probably the single most important habit.
Wow. And it just, again, you have a good way of triggering pictures. In at least in my mind, is I just immediately go to thinking of the various gospels where Christ took time off and went
Yeah.
went to get that quiet time.
Yep. He
and-
went up on the mountain.
yeah. And
I'm giving you a clue. That's not because there were a lot of people at the top of the mountain.
yeah, but but at the top of the mountain is when you get to see the biggest picture of all kind of deal. Yeah, it's not that.
And it's when he came back down with more purpose.
Yeah,
you know,
and renewed. And Moses, Moses did the same thing. I mean, just all throughout Scripture. And it's a realistic thing that we cannot, particularly if you're that high D, high drive type person, is it's kind of like having an electric vehicle, dude. You got to recharge it, or or the gas things is down near empty. You only got so many miles left in you. You better get refilled. So using that analogy,
it also helps you remember, to set boundaries and to all of those other things that we need, because, especially right now in the world, it's such a divisive culture. It's such a, everybody is us versus them. I learned one thing about you and now I know everything about you. Even though we're way more complex than that, and that's not true. There are people that I guarantee you there are things that I agree with them about and things that I don't agree with them about. But if they learned one data point about me, they would immediately assume, oh, we've got to be on opposite sides, about everything, and it's like, no, that's not true, because people are complex. And by the way, reversing that's true the other way too. It's interesting to me because people will scream about, oh, they need to listen to my point of view while they scream loudly over the other person trying to share their point of view. And it's like, okay, well then you need to let them share their point of view. Well, no, because they're wrong. How do you know? First off, you haven't even listened yet, So it's weird how we've created this culture where the idea is, the one that screams the loudest is right. And yet that can't possibly ever be true. That's not, again, if we go back to the lesson of Christ, that's not what the lesson of Christ is. Even when he made a whip and drove the moneylenders out of the temple, before he did that, he also engaged with them and asked questions. I actually get the feeling that if they caught on, and I don't know this obviously, but I have this weird feeling that if they caught on to what he was trying to tell them, they would have left of their own accord. You know what I mean? And it never would have gotten to that point. But it's because they refuse to engage that and have a dialogue and engage with what the message was that caused the division. And yet all too often, and again, this isn't political as in right versus left versus,
no.
It's literally all of us on all sides of the issues right now are going, I'm just going to scream the loudest and now everybody will know I'm right. And it's like, it doesn't work on either side. And so I was reminded, you talked about the book earlier. I'll give folks another book. There's a great book by a gentleman named David McCraney called How Minds Change. And he literally goes into the science of how to talk to somebody who's on the opposite side of every issue from you and actually have an engaging, fruitful dialogue, a conversation that actually makes some progress and moves the needle in terms of y'all understanding each other. Not necessarily they're going to change their point of view, but that you actually can begin to understand them. And what's funny is more often than not, when you engage in that kind of conversation, people actually do begin to, come together and realize, maybe we're not as different as on everything as I thought. You can actually have a fruitful conversation. And especially folks that are in leadership positions and stuff, it is a wonderful book to read because it really gets into the psychology, the neurochemistry, the neurobiology of how we form identity, how we form belief, and how easy it is for us to feel attacked in those areas. Going back to your hostage negotiator, if they make that person feel attacked in any of those areas, bad stuff happens. That's when hostages die. It's an interesting read.
That's well, I'm going to wrap this up with just two things you triggered. Is watch the video. It's called "The Nail in the Forehead."
Yep.
And to get insight into why it's important to be a good listener, so you can understand what the person is sharing with you. That's one thing, and it's a great video. Nail in the forehead. And then the other thing is one of the best books that I read on this whole concept of us versus them. Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy, is a great book identifying what is the stumbling block to most communication and connecting of people that are on opposite ends of a spectrum. Is it can be identified as that egocentric, I'm right, you're wrong, without actually getting all the facts and circumstances.
Well, it usually comes down to identity. It's you're attacking my identity. You're attacking the tribe that I'm part of, and you know, maybe I don't even realize that I'm identifying as part of that tribe, but by attacking that, you're attacking what I believe is true about myself.
Yeah,
and that is always threatening.
Yeah,
you know, when I tell you you are not that person, and you believe you are that person, boy, that hurts. You know, always. And it's just, it's got to feel like an attack.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That brings Sun Tzu and the Art of War comes to mind. You know, it's better to not. It's better to win without having to fight. And there's ways of doing it if you know what he called the weather, the way, and the terrain. That's also a great book to study, not just read. Scott,
and I would argue that it's Christ-like because it's really coming at it with love instead of hatred, and then maybe you never have to fight.
Well, Sun Tzu actually said that there's 2 times that you should never go to war, and it's not out of fear of losing it; it's out of love for your soldiers. They need to be home in the wintertime. They need to be home at harvest time. And they should not be out fighting wars because their family needs them. So it was about his people, not about, hey, am I going to win or lose this battle? So, Scott, I'm telling you, man, it's awesome to have you on today. We'll have to get you back on and dive even deeper. And for our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. It's because of you folks that we're now in 32 countries on 6 continents, and sharing that message with others is so important. And remember, always, every episode I close with this as a reminder: always strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warriors, servants, and leaders do. Love you all, and we'll see you next week.